good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone on planet Earth, wherever you are. This is the Naughty Autie in Conversation, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jessica Eccles. Hi, Jessica.
Hello, hi.
Jessica is a researcher and neurodevelopmental psychiatrist specialising in the links between brain and body, especially as they relate to flexible joints, hypermobility. As well as her university position, she works in the Sussex NHS Neurodevelopmental Service and is setting up the world's first Neurodivergent Brain Body Clinic there. She has been working on the intersect between hypermobility and neurodivergence since she first came to work at Brighton and Sussex Medical School in Neuroscience in 2009. Alongside all things brain and body, she is interested in photography. I didn't know that last one.
Yeah, no, that's one of my interests is taking photographs on film. In fact, 35mm or 120mm for the square look before Instagram. Yeah.
Cool. You've somewhat lost me, but that's awesome stuff. How and when did you develop an interest in neurodivergence and hypermobility?
So when I was at medical school many years ago, we're talking probably about 2005, I was on a ward round in an orthopedic hospital. And one of the doctors came up to me and said, you've got sway back knees. I think you're hypermobile. Come and see me in a clinic. So I'd never heard of hypermobility. And I certainly didn't know an awful lot about it. So when I, a few years later, when I came to Brighton and Sussex Medical School to work for Professor Hugo Critchley, he said to me, I've got a project that you might be interested in. It's about hypermobility. Have you heard of it? And I said, well, actually, I think I might have it. So I got, we did this, sorry, it's a slightly long-winded story. We did this interesting study of looking at the brain. We had a group of people, 70 people who had been through the brain scanner at the newly fashioned medical school. The brain scanner had only been around for about a year or so. So all of the people who had been through the brain scanner as healthy people, we divided them into two groups, bendy or not bendy. So hypermobile according to a hypermobility score. And we pooled the brains and we used a statistical program to work out which parts of the brain were different in the hypermobile group compared to the non-hypermobile group, which is sounding a bit geeky here. But what we found was really interesting. We found differences in an area of the brain called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is responsible for fear and emotion processing. And at that point, people have been talking about hypermobility and anxiety for a while. And we thought, well, this is really interesting because maybe this is a factor in why hypermobile people may be more likely to experience panic or anxiety. And so that was a nice finding. But we also found differences in area of the brain about where you are, your sense of where you are in space. So this is really kind of cuts across a lot of neurodivergent conditions, the phenomenon of dyspraxia. And we knew that hypermobility had been associated with dyspraxia. That was known. We also found some differences in some brain areas that had also been implicated in autism. So we were thinking to ourselves, is there something about hypermobility, the brain, and how the brain might be different in autistic people or people with ADHD? Of course, this was back in 2009, 2010. People weren't as enlightened perhaps as they are now and weren't talking so much about neurodivergence and neurodiversity. So we were still thinking, sort of in the medical model, if you see what I mean. Yeah. But that's what really sparked my interest in trying to work out the connection between the two, because at that point there had been in studies in the literature, go on PubMed and you have a look for all the papers, there really weren't many linking hypermobility to neurodivergent conditions. There were a few, mainly individual case studies. So, you know, this child, autistic, also lacks joints, but there was nothing, nothing systematic. So that really started a quest in terms of, are these things related, which sounds strange, and it's taken a long time to get to the point where we've been able to actually sort of publish our findings and start communicating to the scientific world about this link. But I think from, you know, reading forums and communicating with hypermobile people, that many people in the hypermobility community have been thinking that there might be a link between hypermobility and neurodivergent conditions for a long time. What I'm not so sure is, in the neurodivergent community, are people thinking, is there a link with flexible joints? Or, I mean, flexible joints, some people call it hypermobility, some people think of the sort of the end of the spectrum of hypermobility, EDS. There's lots of different words for it. So I think there's been a lot of chatter, but we decided we were going to systematically look at this, and over a number of years, all of the people, well, not all of the people who attended our Sussex Neurodevelopmental Service, we assessed them to see if they were hypermobile. And we also, hypermobile people, because of the way their bodies are made, to do with the connective tissue that is everywhere in the body, may be more likely to experience some physical health problems. So you can imagine you might be more likely to experience gut problems, irritable bowel, because of the way that this connective tissue is everywhere. So it's in the gut, it's in the skin, it's in the lungs, and we wondered whether the neurodivergent people, if they were hypermobile, were they more likely to experience physical health issues? And if they did, was that because they were hypermobile? So that was our hypothesis, our research question, so to speak. And we did find this to be the case. So we were able to, it doesn't sound like a huge number of people, but it's a good start. We looked at just under 110 neurodivergent patients who come through our clinic. Some of them came through the clinic before DSM-5, so back in the DSM-4 days. And so some of them only had one diagnosis. So some of them had ADHD, some of them were autistic, some had Tourette syndrome. No one had ever looked at hypermobility and Tourette syndrome before at all, actually. Not even kind of case studies. So we had 110 hypermobile people, not hypermobile people, sorry, neurodivergent people, some of them with a combination of diagnoses, some with a single diagnosis. And we compared the hypermobility to that in the general population. So a big study with over 6,000 people in it. So we wanted to see, is the level of hypermobility in our patient group different to the general population? We also compared them to a comparison group, and we asked the comparison group how much pain they were experiencing and how much, now this is a weird one, you think, what is this all about? Dizziness on standing they felt. And the reason why we're interested in dizziness on standing is this is a common thing in hypermobile people. Can feel dizzy, lightheaded, palpitations when they stand up. And this can sometimes be misinterpreted as, by doctors and things, as anxiety. And it is probably because of the connective tissue. Maybe your blood is pooling in your feet, and when you stand up, it stays in your feet and your heart rate has to rise to keep the blood pumping around the body. And this leads to these strange feelings on standing. So we asked the comparison group, did they have those sort of feelings and symptoms? They're called dysautonomia symptoms, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it just means abnormalities of the involuntary nervous system. So we looked at that, and we looked at levels of pain. Now, for some years, probably wrongly, people have thought that autistic people were insensitive to pain or didn't experience pain in the same way as non-neurodivergent people. But that wasn't what we were seeing in clinic. Lots of patients were, had aches and pains, and there was some evidence in the literature about chronic pain in ADHD. So we were like, we're interested in pain, and obviously pain is horrible, so identifying it and looking into it further, I think, was worthwhile. So anyway, I've kind of gone round in a circle, but that's what we did. We assessed people to see if they were hypermobile, how many musculoskeletal symptoms they had, and how many symptoms of dizziness they had on standing. And we found that the neurodivergent group, about 50% of them were hypermobile, according to a specific criteria, compared to 20% of the general population. And if you work this out mathematically, that means if you're neurodivergent, you were 4 times more likely to be hypermobile than if you weren't. Does that make sense? So. Yeah. And then what was really interesting, because people have been suspecting this for a while, and in fact, I forgot to mention, in Sweden, they have these amazing health registries. So they keep these databases of health records. I mean, some people might find that a bit troubling, but it's really useful for research. And in Sweden, they had found if you had a hypermobility diagnosis, you were sort of 7 times more likely to be autistic and 5 times more likely to have ADHD. So this link was definitely emerging. So we confirmed that the other way round. Okay. If you are neurodivergent, are you more likely to be hypermobile? Rather than if you are hypermobile, are you more likely to be neurodivergent? It's a subtle difference, but it is important. And so we found that. And then we also found that the neurodivergent group, remember we've got this comparison group, they have much higher levels of pain and higher levels of symptoms of dizziness on standings, orthostatic intolerance. And so that was a really interesting relationship in that you experience more pain the greater the number of hypermobile joints, and the same with the orthostatic intolerance. So there was a really nice relationship. And then we did some modeling, some maths, and we found that the relationship between being neurodivergent and having the physical health symptoms was probably in the main explained by the hypermobility.
Wow. Okay. Yes, you have answered at least 3 of my questions already.
By going on a rant.
No, it's good. We need all of that. It's extremely informative, very useful. I was going to ask, there are plenty of people tuning in tonight who are completely new to hypermobility, EDS, yes, etc. So you did allude to connective tissue earlier, etc. But I was going to ask rather simply, what is hypermobility? What is EDS? What does it stand for?
Oh, yes, of course.
And what are some things people can look out for? So I myself received a diagnosis of hypermobility spectrum disorder earlier this year. Interestingly, upon entering the community, you cannot avoid the topic of hypermobility. I had never really thought about it before. I'd never heard of EDS, right? I understood that some people were more flexible than others, but it wasn't really something I considered until I entered the community. Lots of people talking about it, lots of my friends who are perhaps in their 30s and 40s talk about it and how they wish they could have had this identified a lot younger. I'm 29 myself, and so I thought I would go and have it checked out, and a rheumatologist confirmed it. And so I've been very interested in it ever since. And it's not just about hypermobility. There are other things as well. So yes, I digress. The question is, what is hypermobility? What is EDS? What is the difference? What are all of these things?
Okay, so hypermobility is probably a shortening of the term joint hypermobility, which suggests that your joints have unusual flexibility or range of motion. And when we think about that, we often think about contortionists or circus performers, but that is not the case. An unusual range of movement in the joints can actually be quite subtle. So for example, do you see how my elbow is bending slightly backwards? Is that captured on camera? Yeah, it's not
one on the Baton scale.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the other one as well.
Two.
But these are this is quite subtle. This is not to the point that it's going this way. So those it means that your joints extend more than they should. And so we look for things like being able to bend your finger back 90 degrees. Being able to put your thumb back on your wrist. And what I mentioned about what happened to me at medical school with being identified with having knees that bend backwards. So that's a bit harder, and I'm not going to demonstrate that one. But
like flamingos.
Yes, and you once you start looking for it, you see it in so many places.
And it all makes sense. Like I can't. I think because it's the zebra, isn't it? Is the symbol of
the zebra is the symbol.
I want it to be flamingo.
No, I think flamingo is fantastic. But so you've got the knees, and then you've got the being able to put your hands flat on the floor without bending your knees. So those are the main features in the scale that we used, which is commonly used but flawed, to measure hypermobility. So this is the joint aspect, but there are loads of joints that scale doesn't capture. And
I was just about to say, because I have plenty of friends who maintain they cannot be hypermobile or EDS because they don't meet the Baton scale criteria. So you're saying that's not necessarily the case?
Not necessarily the case. So there are other joints that are really important in hypermobility and connective tissue problems. So things like the shoulders, the hips, the ankles, all of them can hyperextend and can cause problems like coming out of socket or even nearly coming out of socket. So that's like dislocations and subluxations. So those are other features that you can have. But hypermobility, and I'll get to the point about what you need to get a different diagnosis in a sec. Hypermobility is really a bit of a red herring. It's just one visible feature that you can track. The other things are to do with the skin, which is connective tissue, which is, so having smooth, soft skin, bruising easily, potentially, having stretchy skin, stretch marks, particular type of scarring. All of those things are some of the skin features. And then there are other features like some people who are hypermobile have narrow wrists, like I do, so they can
I do.
They can, exactly. And this is having elegant spidery fingers, arachnodactyly. we call it in the medical profession. So there are those features. There are also other features like being more likely to have some medical troubles like hernias, things like that. And all of these contribute to the whole spectrum of hypermobility. And some people have a very high Baton score, the one that we were talking about, with the elbows and the fingers. And they also have a lot of connective tissue features, and they have a strong family history or experience significant pain or dislocations. And if they have all of those features above a particular threshold, which is perhaps arbitrary, then you might get a diagnosis of something called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is also called EDS. And hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is just one of, I think it's different between whether there are 13 or 14 types of EDS. So HEDS is not rare. The other types of EDS, vascular EDS, classical EDS, etc., are very, very rare, but they generally all have hypermobility as a feature, but they can have some quite serious medical problems associated with them. And that, because of the rarity of EDS itself, I think that's where the zebra symbol comes from, is to do with that. So some of the forms of EDS are incredibly rare, but hypermobile EDS, no one knows exactly how common it is. I think it's not uncommon. So if you meet this particular cutoff, you get that diagnosis. If you have all of these features that we're talking about, and you don't need a specific score on the Baton scale for this, you get a hypermobility spectrum disorder diagnosis, which is the hypermobility, like the autism spectrum, the hypermobility spectrum. And most people, you see, as they get older, maybe their joints stiffen up, they don't appear so bendy. So it's a combination of having some joint hypermobility, but a suggestion of this connective tissue involvement throughout the body and having symptoms. And then there are other people who have flexible joints and don't necessarily have any issues or physical health issues at all. So and we're actually actively going to be trying to do some research into this in the future, is what is it? What are the protective characteristics in terms of being hypermobile, but not necessarily having pain or dislocations or other troubles? Because of course, hypermobility, like neurodivergence, can be a massive asset.
That was going to be my next question, right? So if a person is to adhere to the medical model of autism or other neurodivergent conditions, then it's very much framed as a negative thing. And I was going to ask whether there are benefits to hypermobility, which is interesting, because before understanding all of this, I assumed that all flexible people were actually at an advantage, right? And for those who were slightly stiffer would be at a disadvantage, particularly when it came to sports, etc. But then one realizes it's diagnosed as a medical disorder, but surely there are strengths and weaknesses.
Yes. So there are, for example, one of the things you mentioned, sport, really important. So certain sports, I mean, I don't know if you watch the tennis or there's a lot of, you can see that, some of the backhands that people go for and stuff could only be done by someone who is very flexible. And the same with music. there are some piano pieces that can only be played
Yeah.
by people with arachnodactyly, or people who have very
Sounds like a
flexible.
dinosaur.
Yeah, right. It does, doesn't it? Arachnodactyly just means
Yeah.
finger in Latin.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's all this stuff that some things can only be done by hypermobile people in terms of music. But sorry.
No, I was just going to ask as well before I forget. You and I have had this conversation before, and I have noticed that many of my stims have taken place within the areas of my body in which I am hypermobile, right? So I've always popped my whatever that bone is in there. I've always popped that in and out of place. I'm a guitar player, I'm a bass player, I'm a pianist, right? So I wondered if there was anything, if I'm onto anything there.
Oh, I think you are.
I always want to stim the parts of me that are hypermobile.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. I think there is definitely something there. I mean, I think having flexible joints would, predispose to certain stims, as you say, like popping or clicking joints. But I think that with hypermobility and music, you can see that it lends itself to being able to do and to perform music, and that can be a stim in and of itself. I think it's fascinating, the link between the two. And if we think of the broader sort of neurodivergence as well, if there is a link between how your body is and how your brain type is,
yeah.
you can see that could explain some of the, or be related to some of the hyperactive fidgety behavior that, although can be confined to an ADHD diagnosis, can actually go across the neurodivergent conditions.
Amazing. Yes, so
but there was one
fine.
thing. Yeah, no, so you mentioned how it could be a great advantage, but it's also be a disadvantage in sport and music, in that you may get repetitive strain injury, or you may be more likely to injure yourself and then possibly take time to recover. So I was thinking about you hear about some sports people who are constantly getting injured, and you think maybe are they hypermobile?
I've been thinking that too. I mean, partly what prompted me to get it checked out was I was noticing joint pain in my knuckles when I was boxing, right? And my boxing coach kind of exhausted every little thing that he could do with me, right, in terms of recovery. And he just said, I don't know, I've not experienced someone with this type of pain before. So that's partly what prompted me, because like I said, a lot of my friends who are in their 30s and 40s are having ongoing problems that could be of a very long-term nature that I wanted to try and stave off, because but it's all very interesting. I was thinking about the skin component as well.
Oh yes.
So I remember one of the first questions I asked an autistic friend of mine years ago was, have you noticed we all look younger? And she said, yes, that could be the hypermobility component, maybe the skin producing an excess of collagen or something, right? And thus wrinkling less. Because I said, yeah, I've noticed that. I look much younger. I still get ID'd. I'm nearly 30, right? And as a child, this may sound weird to some viewers, I was the family stim, in that people would put in requests to massage my arm, right? Please, Harry,
so
please
smooth.
Come on. And they said, it's like velvet, it's like silk, it's like, and I remember reading about that thinking, oh, that's very interesting, right? But obviously soft skin wasn't mentioned as part of hypermobility spectrum disorder. It's only spoken about within the context of EDS. So at least as far as my personal research has taken me. So yeah, this would perhaps link to, is there a look? You know, is there a younger kind of look there? Some people talk about, well, as I wrote a post about a year ago saying, I can tell who's PDA by their eyes, by their features, you know. And a lot of people saying, yeah, you're onto something, Harry. And then a lot of people were saying, oh, but that could be explained through EDS and hypermobility as well, having younger, sensitive looking kind of baby faces. So I wondered what's going on there.
I think it's fascinating, and you're absolutely right in terms of some hypermobile people, and you don't need an HEDS diagnosis to have this feature. It's on the hypermobility spectrum, have soft velvety skin, and that is an absolute feature. And for those people, they often find that they look they look younger than they are. They're more likely to get ID'd. They don't age in the same way, so it can and I think as you get older, that's a bit of an advantage.
That's an advantage, isn't it? That's nice to look forward to.
But I think when you are 21, maybe not.
No, yes, I had that issue
because you may look 12.
Yeah, I'd go out with my friends, and it was almost a hindrance, like, you look about 12, mate. Like,
yeah, won't take you out in case you don't get into places. Yeah. No, so I think that is absolutely right. And there is also it's not a hypermobility spectrum disorder, but it's related, and some of the features are in the HEDS criteria. Is a particular condition where you have a look of having quite long, gangly arms. So your arm span is significantly greater than your height, and it's also associated with having the long, spidery fingers and the narrow wrists. And that look, often people with that look have quite thin, narrow faces, and so I think that can be a look. I think there's lots of there's slightly different looks. There isn't a single hypermobility EDS look at all, but and I suppose once you get really into looking for hypermobility everywhere, as I have done, you start to see it more.
You do. You can't not see it, right?
And no, in magazines.
Yeah, but
on the public transport, everywhere.
Like, yeah, it's like almost this kind of elfin look.
That is one of them. Absolutely,
like,
yes.
Perfect for being cast as an elf in Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
But I before I had the vocabulary, I thought neurodivergent people have this kind of almost a mythical creature look. So that's
I think there's something in there that is to do with the body type.
Yeah, okay, so there's other things I'd like to talk about as well. Lots of this we have covered. Now, perhaps I want to now explore the area of addiction, maybe food sensitivity or sensitivity to medication, drugs and chemicals, and something that I have brought to your attention before. I have an extremely addictive nature, but at the same time, I'm hypersensitive to everything I put into my body. So it feels paradoxical. Like, in my teenage years and earlier 20s, I wanted to be high all the time, right? There could be an ADHD explanation. I want to experience altered states of consciousness. I want a dopamine hit. I want a rush. I want a thrill. But at the same time, such a lightweight, always passing out too early and, panicking. And I can remember noticing this paradox in, I've got to be on this, I've got to be on that, but I can't handle it at the same time. So are we more prone to addiction? Are we more sensitive at the same time, would you say?
Well, I think these are really interesting questions, Harry. And I think we don't know for sure, but there was some early work in hypermobility this was a context of the Spanish group very interested in hypermobility and anxiety. They were probably seeing a lot of hypermobile people who had anxiety who were maybe also neurodivergent, but that hadn't been recognized. That is a possibility. Anyway, early work they did showed that hypermobile people were more likely to use chocolate, nicotine and alcohol, and that related to some fear sensitivity questionnaires. This is just one small study, so I can't completely overgeneralize on the addiction front. And using chocolate isn't necessarily an addiction, but it seems that what they were conceptualizing it as is these dysfunctional behaviors. Here is a possible reason why people are using them, anxiety, and that's how they framed that work. And when I work in clinic and see adult neurodivergent people, you can see there are so many reasons why people might seek out substances. So as a stim of some description, because of kind of ADHD impulsivity, but also because of masking and the physical pain, weight, fatigue of masking, to try and facilitate social, navigate social environments. You can, and also, see this constant racing thoughts and busy thoughts. You can see how you might just want to go into a different headspace. That makes so much sense. But in terms of and also, I suppose, we think sometimes of kind of all or nothing behavior, all or nothing in the context of substances. But I think the second point you're making is there a reason why we might be more sensitive to things? And there's been this real, and this has kind of only really come to the foreground in the last, I'd say, maybe 8 years, and has been really amplified actually by long COVID, is there's this interest in sensitivity to things like, I don't know, washing powders, medicines, food, called mast cell activation, which is where you have a overactive immune response to supposedly benign, well, not benign, to kind of mild stressors. So it's a bit like you have all of these inflammation chemicals released in response to, say, something. I can't do it, but some people can. It's where you can like write on your skin. Have you ever heard of that? No. So it's like,
well, I've heard of people doing it, but I've not thought about it as a thing.
Nah, so that's one example, but so it might come out in random hives because of like being touched might suddenly cause redness or something, or perfume might cause you to come out and in itchy or allergy.
My brother sometimes randomly comes out in hives.
Exactly,
and but he gets it when he drinks red wine.
Yes, because there is one of the chemicals in this kind of inflammatory mix that is released is histamine, and histamine is in red wine.
Yeah.
And so some people find if they drink red wine, it can make them feel not only hungover or ill, but they actually start getting like red ears,
I remember
itchy.
We all really freaked out once because this was years ago, it could have been about 10 years ago, we were having a drink in my flat in Brighton, and he randomly started coming out in all these hives, and we quickly like rushed him out of the room, and then it calmed down, right? And I recently put him through the Baton score and I diagnosed him, right? But everything is just clicking into place right now. This is really interesting stuff.
So people have been really interested in this in terms of COVID and long COVID as well, actually, mast cell activation. And the problem with mast cell activation is it's really hard to capture in a biological test. So it's actually really hard to do research on it, and therefore it's hard to progress knowledge and awareness. But this sensitivity, talking to colleagues at conferences and things, they say a lot that there seems, there's definitely a hint of a relationship here with neurodivergence,
Right.
potentially, but there is no research.
No.
And as I said, it's very hard to do research in this space. But I think it would explain why some people, it kind of clusters, hypermobility, the stuff I was talking about in terms of the difficulties when you stand up. Those difficulties when you stand up, you can also get when you're in a hot environment, hot shower, hot bath, feeling faint, lightheaded in the bath, and also after eating a big meal, I must say. So it's not limited to standing. It's to do with the fact that blood is moved in the body in different places. So there seems to be this MCAS, the mast cell activation, EDS or hypermobility, and orthostatic intolerance seem to cluster together.
What about POTS?
Oh, so POTS is the orthostatic intolerance.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So POTS, that's postural tachycardia syndrome. That's the dizziness on standing. They all seem to go together. So if EDS is hanging out with these things, maybe neurodivergence is too.
Well, that's the thing. I think lots of people describe it as almost the physical component of neurodivergence. All very interesting stuff. No, Freddie, not yours. What role do you think creativity, giftedness, and intelligence play in all of this?
I think this is fascinating, and it's an area that we're actively researching at the moment. There was a great paper released a few weeks ago, or maybe I only read it a few weeks ago, but talking about neurodivergent traits and creativity. I think that across the neurodiverse spectrum, there are so many attributes that could facilitate creativity in terms of out of the box thinking, attention to detail,
impulsivity.
Yeah, because impulsivity
could link to addiction as well, right?
Could link to addiction, but impulsivity of action can also be impulsivity of thought, and impulsive thoughts can wander into creativity. And creativity is such a complicated construct and very hard to research because how do you distill it down? But I think there's going to be a big overlap between hypermobility, neurodiversity, and creativity in terms of what we've already described, in that hypermobility can predispose you to certain creative pursuits. But I think that's the physical side. I think mentally can also predispose you to creativity. I mean, hyperfocus, and there's so many ways in which you can imagine neurodivergent people are creative. I mean, I think it's a fact, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I talk a lot about the flow state.
Yes.
I talk a lot about how perhaps we are always trying to somehow get back there into a state of flow. And there's something meditative about it. And there's something meditative about perhaps what yogis or meditation masters describe about that higher state of consciousness, right? It's a flow state. That's what they're talking about. And they give you a mantra that you repeat and repeat and repeat, or certain body movements that we repeat. It's like, yeah, we do that anyway. We have this kind of pre-installed need to repeat certain things, narrow the focus down more and more and more and more and more until lovely, lovely experiences. And as a creative ADHD person, the impulse is the same. It just differs on the surface, right? So sometimes I've got to buy that. Other times I've got to press that. Other times, idea, let's get it down, right? It's exactly the same thing, regardless. Some are just more conducive to favorable outcomes than others, right?
Yes.
But it's all very, very, very fascinating.
Yes. And
Okay.
also, I don't know, I've been thinking about, appreciation of color and how that can be linked to creativity. And maybe that's a stim, being really interested in color. Maybe it's a sensory.
Oh, I'd say absolutely, right? I'd say absolutely. Some colors, I know that some people feel queasy when they're, and we need a kind of a word that describes the opposite of a stim, right?
Yes.
Because some of us,
exactly. So a
some
sensory
colors make
aversion.
people queasy, right? I know people who can't stand the color red. It has a physiological effect. But then you talk about blues and greens, and they're like, oh yes, blues and greens. It's absolutely visually stimmy.
Yeah, but you can see people who have those experiences, this heightened sensory perception, either aversion or pleasure, then their color, or even a synesthetic, which is where you see like numbers as colors or colors as numbers, or the mixing of the senses. You can see that would potentially predispose to creativity.
It's very interesting. I spoke about that not so long ago. There are certain terms and phrases that induce hunger in me, like immediately. Bizarrely, and I have written about this, the term mental illness helps me eat the rest of my food. And it particularly makes me crave scrambled eggs, the term mental illness. When people say that, I just crave eggs. It's bizarre. It's a bizarre world, our brains. So everyone who's watching, I invite you now to ask questions you may have to Jessica. And whilst they are thinking, Jessica, I didn't know whether you wanted to perhaps show one of the slides that you spoke about, unless you think.
Oh yes, I know. I just wanted to show that it's not all just it's not necessarily the contortionist stuff. I've got a little slide that I stole from the internet. Let me have a look. Can we see share? So there are other can we see this? So this is just a depiction. I think Harry and I have tried to describe the Baton scale. So those are some aspects of the Baton scale, but there are other things. So like fingers going up like this. I remember I had a teacher at school whose fingers were very much like that. But these are this one here, sitting in the W position, is something that a lot of but is a feature of having hypermobile joints. And when I'm in clinic and we're talking to our neurodivergent adults, and you ask them, when you were a child, did you sit in the W position, or people, did they ever say, did you sit in that position?
I can remember a kid in my class just sitting like that. And looking back, he had to be autistic. There's no way around that. And he would sit like that. I remember in a PE class, like when we were sitting on the floor waiting for the PE teacher to come in, and people would be just blown away by that position. And we'd all try and copy, because I'm not hypermobile there. But none of us could do it. And he just sat there casually, like it was nothing. Crazy.
And then the other one here is the sort of yogi pose. Where you can put your hands behind your back.
Or there's that one, isn't there?
Yeah, no, exactly. But people who can do this, they have to say, "Oh, I'm not flexible at all. I'm quite stiff." And I think that's because a lot of people in yoga are very flexible. So it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum.
Right. Oh, No, I was just gonna say. Was there another slide? Well, actually, I remember an ex-partner of mine. Her knees would go in the other way, and she talked about how as a child it could be a bit dodgy jumping on a trampoline, right? Because it makes me cringe thinking about it. But you know what I'm saying, right? And she said she injured herself once because when she jumped, the impact caused her knees to kind of lock the wrong way. Ouch. Yeah, I'm having intrusive thoughts now.
And that's maybe mirror pain synesthesia. Vicarious pain.
Definitely. Right, so here we are. We've got some questions here. Emma Taylor Turner asks, Jessica, will there be more research into the links between ASD, ADHD, and EDS, POTS, and MCAS?
Oh yes, I think so. Our team, our group at the university, we are working hard in this space, and we have a number of papers that we are trying to get ready for publication. We've got research results that we need to get out there. We're also writing grants to try and explore this space further. So yes, absolutely, there's going to hopefully be more research from our group in this area. And I think, in terms of, I think slowly the awareness is increasing, and so other doctors and researchers are getting interested in it maybe too. So I think there will be
they must be inundated. Rheumatologists must be progressively becoming inundated with people seeking assessment.
Diagnosis.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think watch this space. I think it's taken, we just sort of at the beginning of what could be the crest of a real wave. I think we're at the very, very beginning of it.
Carly says, I sit like that, the W sit, but with legs crossed over each other.
Yeah, I can imagine. Sort of double.
I'm trying to picture what that looks like.
Yeah. It's kind of I can picture it, and it's like, and I do I cross my legs, but I don't know, when I sit I cross my legs, but I cross them twice, so I sort of wrap them around.
Right, okay. And the traditional lotus position in yoga isn't just legs crossed, it's legs crossed, but you kind of end up getting your feet like nested in your lap. And I'm thinking of people at school, and I remember this one kid would walk around like a praying mantis like that on his knees, like brilliant. So where are we here? How can we improve the wibbliness and pain?
It's a tricky one, and I think that pain and difficulties in hypermobility like that is really, a lot of it is about strengthening your core, which sounds really boring, unfortunately. Is a lot of hypermobile people, because of the way their joints overextend and things, they actually have very weak middles, even if they are fit and do lots of exercise and training. So anything you can do to tighten up the core and strengthen the core can really help with pain all over the place. So if you've got a weak core, you might get pain in your knees, pain in your hips, pain in your ankles, pain in your neck, pain in your upper back. By strengthening the core, that can make a big difference. The other top tip, which is a bit easier than strengthening the core, is helping out flat feet. So lots of hypermobile people have flat feet. So arch supports, or flat feet when they actually walk. So arch supports can really help with sorting out, kind of stabilizing things and helping with kind of hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain, even neck pain.
And going back to the core thing, surely that's another correlation, because autistic people often, a feature of autistic people is often to have a slightly weaker core. This has been flagged up a lot, so lots of crossover here. Where are we? So does it count as flexibility if you have your limbs flailed all over and in weird positions, that they shouldn't really be able to, oh God, the comment section's jumping about again. That's very irritating. Hang on, I'll start again. Does it count as flexibility if you have your limbs flailed all over and in weird positions, that they shouldn't really be able to go to comfortably, but not flexible in the sense of being able to touch your toes with ease?
Yeah, so touching your toes is just one feature. It's not something I can do, for example. No. And like Harry's demonstrated, you might have really flexible fingers, but not other parts of the body. So,
yeah, because I've heard terms like peripheral hypermobility, localized
hypermobility, generalized hypermobility.
So peripheral is when it's your extremities, right? Your hands, fingers, feet, toes. localized is when it could be like your elbows and your knees, but nowhere else.
Yeah.
And generalized is when all over.
Yeah, exactly. But we have to bear in mind, like we said, that Baton scale doesn't cover loads of joints. That flexibility can be an asset and a liability, like the shoulders and the hips.
It's making me, I tell you what, correlation that I'm drawing right now is when people think I can't be autistic because I give eye contact, you know.
Oh,
It's a bit like that, isn't it? But like the hypermobile version, people might say I can't be hypermobile, you know,
because I can't touch my toes.
Yeah. It's like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, but I think there's people are just really doctors, patients, everyone is just not very aware of the concept. I mean, I hope
Same with autism.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
same
when
with
you try and link these two things together in any way, I mean, it's double whammy in terms of lack of awareness.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much work to do.
Mm.
Is there anything we can do to protect our physical health when we have these physical symptoms, pain, fatigue, etc.?
Yes, I think trying to be in a good routine of stabilizing your physical self. So doing some work on core stability and trying to keep active, but in a really kind of mindful, I don't mean mindful like mindfulness meditation, but like not overdoing it and not underdoing it, adjusting it for yourself in a gentle way, but really do try, but keeping active, but without overdoing it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Where are we now? So my daughter does what she calls contortions, very bendy, yet probably dyspraxic according to the OT. Is there a link? And yeah, Jessica did talk about that at the beginning.
Yes. So there's been long time a link between dyspraxia and hypermobility in children. I mean, I don't think a huge number of studies, but there is an overrepresentation of hypermobility in dyspraxic children.
Right. Interesting. Does the assessment for EDS feature all of the hypermobile positions on the slide?
No.
Right.
No. So it only features the ones that we talked about in the Baton score. So it doesn't feature the W position, it doesn't feature the fingers going up like this, and it doesn't feature the yoga position, all of which are important hypermobility features.
Matilda says, hello, excellent talk, really fascinating. I'm an HEDS and ASD scientist here with background in biomedical sciences, more specialized in cellular and molecular biology, confocal
microscopy.
Yeah, I would love to put my competences to some use to help understand better EDS and or ASD. Is there any research teams I could apply to for a postdoc? Thanks a lot for your research and fantastic Zoom meeting.
I think, where is Matilda based? We don't know. If in the US, was it Matilda? I've forgotten the name already.
I'm guessing perhaps not the US or the UK, but I'm sure they will confirm.
Because there is, in the US, there is a lab that looks at genetics and stuff of EDS called the Norris Lab, and they particularly welcome EDS researchers.
Matilda is in the UK.
In the UK. So I unfortunately can't speak from a genetic perspective. We particularly encourage people with lived experience to apply for jobs in our team. But in terms of who is doing the molecular stuff, I know that there are some researchers in the UK. Let me just quickly have a look on Twitter and tell you where they're based. Okay, so Sabia Malik is doing at Warwick. working on some more molecular type of things within hypermobility. So maybe it might be worth following them or reaching out to them.
Okay. Let's see. Does it affect the digestive system and intestines?
Oh, yes. So you can imagine if you've got difference in your connective tissues everywhere in the gut, you can see this maybe means that it moves in a different way. So there is an association between being hypermobile and having what is frequently called irritable bowel syndrome. There is also association with constipation, with reflux, nausea. There are lots and lots of different gut issues that hypermobile people experience. And I think we know autistic people more likely to have gut issues.
Yeah, another
Well,
thing.
or it's definitely
Another thing, just it's
yeah.
uncanny. It's uncanny. And finally, where do you begin to start looking into a private EDS assessment?
Well, again, it would depend on which country you're in. But if you're specifically looking for a private EDS assessment, the EDS Society in the US, who have a website, they have a directory of professionals who they're obviously not listing everyone, but they list a fair few by all in most of the countries across the world.
Yes.
Well, certainly, you know, UK, US, Europe, and Australia. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's we've come to the end of our questions here. So that rounds us off quite nicely. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I'm sure it's been very useful to our viewers. It's certainly been enlightening for me. I think it's just such an important topic, and yeah, thank you so much for all the work you do in this area.
No, thank you, Harry. It's been great to talk, and I hope everything goes well.
I'm sure it will.